The confrontation happened at the Farm Bureau meeting in March of 1981. Leonard Shaw was sitting in the back row of the community center, minding his own business, when Dennis Kramer stood up to give his presentation. Dennis owned Kramer's John Deere dealership in town, sponsored the meeting, always used these gatherings as opportunities to talk about the latest equipment and why farmers needed to modernize. Tonight's topic: why outdated equipment is costing you money. Dennis had charts, graphs, statistics about fuel efficiency and acres covered per hour and return on investment. He talked about the new John Deere 4440 with its turbocharged engine and SoundGuard cab, about how farmers who upgraded saw immediate productivity gains. Then he said something that made the whole room go quiet. "Look, I'm going to be blunt here. If you're still farming with equipment from the 50s and 60s, you're not a serious farmer. You're a hobbyist. You're too poor to farm right, and you're holding back the entire industry." He paused, let that sink in, then added, "And frankly, in 10 years, farmers like that won't exist anymore. They'll either modernize or they'll be gone." Leonard, who was 43 years old and farming 400 acres with a 1956 Farmall 400 and a 1963 International 806, felt every person in that room glance in his direction. Because everyone knew Dennis was talking about him. Leonard could have stayed quiet, could have let it slide, could have walked out and gone home and forgotten about it. Instead, he stood up. "Dennis, I've got a question for you." The room turned to look at him. Dennis, surprised, nodded. "Sure, Leonard, go ahead. How much debt do your customers carry on average for their equipment?" Dennis blinked. "I don't see how that's relevant. Just answer the question. Average equipment debt for a farmer buying from your dealership, ballpark figure." Dennis shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it varies. Depends on the operation size, what they're buying. Give me a number." "Probably $60,000 to $80,000 for a full line of modern equipment." Leonard nodded. "60,000 to $80,000. And what are the monthly payments on that?" "Again, it depends. Rough estimate. $1,200 to $1,500 a month, maybe more depending on the package and interest rate." "Okay. So your average customer is sending $1,200 to $1,500 a month to a bank, every month, for 5 to 7 years, whether they have a good crop or a bad crop, whether prices are up or down, whether it rains or doesn't rain. That payment comes due no matter what." Dennis's jaw tightened. "That's how financing works, Leonard. But they're getting modern, efficient equipment in return." "Right, modern equipment." Leonard looked around the room. "How many farmers in this county have lost their operations in the last 5 years?" Silence. "I'll tell you. 17. I went to 12 of those auctions, watched good farmers lose everything. You know what almost every one of them had in common? Brand new John Deere equipment, purchased from your dealership, financed through your bank, with payments they couldn't make when times got hard." "Now, Dennis, that's not fair," someone started. "Let me finish," Leonard said. "Dennis just told us that farmers with old equipment are too poor to farm right, that we're hobbyists, that we'll be gone in 10 years. He looked directly at Dennis. "I own my 400 acres free and clear, bought it in 1967 for $78,000, paid it off by 1975. I own my equipment, every tractor, every implement, paid for in cash. I have no debt, zero. Which means when I have a bad year, I don't lose my farm. I just have a bad year and keep farming." "Your customers, Dennis, they're one drought away from bankruptcy, one price crash away from foreclosure, one bad decision away from losing everything 3 generations built, and you're standing up here telling me I'm too poor to farm, right?" The room was completely silent now. "I'll tell you what I think. I think the farmers who are too poor to farm right are the ones who are so far in debt they can't afford to have a bad year. I think being rich means owning what you have, not owing what you use." Leonard sat down, Dennis tried to continue his presentation, but the energy was gone. The meeting broke up 20 minutes later. As people filed out, several farmers came up to Leonard. Some agreed with him, some thought he'd been too harsh, some just wanted to talk about his philosophy, but one person's reaction mattered more than all the others. Dennis Kramer walked up to Leonard in the parking lot. His face was red, his hands were clenched. "You embarrassed me in there. You called me too poor to farm right in front of everyone I know. I was making a general point about the industry." "No, Dennis, you were making a specific point about farmers like me, and I responded. Don't dish it out if you can't take it back." Dennis stepped closer. "You think you're so smart with your paid-off equipment and your debt-free farm, but you're farming 400 acres with tractors older than your kids. Meanwhile, my customers are running 1,000-acre operations with modern equipment. They're the future. You're the past." "We'll see," Leonard said. "Check back in 10 years, see who's still farming and who's not." Dennis got in his truck and drove away, and Leonard Shaw went home and started planning how he was going to prove that son of a bitch wrong. Before we go any further, I need you to understand what happened after that meeting, because Leonard Shaw didn't just prove Dennis Kramer wrong. He built something that made every debt-laden farmer in the county question everything they thought they knew about success and equipment and what it really means to farm right. If you want to know how a man with 50-year-old tractors ended up owning more land than everyone who mocked him, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story gets better with every year that passes. Let me tell you about Leonard Shaw in 1981. He was 43 years old. He'd bought his farm in 1967 when he was 29, right after coming back from 2 years in Vietnam. 400 acres of decent ground in central Kansas. Paid $78,000 for it. His father had helped with $20,000 down payment. Leonard financed the remaining $58,000 at 7%. He'd worked construction during the day and farmed evenings and weekends, lived cheap, saved aggressive, made extra payments whenever he could. By 1975, the farm was paid off. 8 years to clear the debt, 8 years of discipline and sacrifice and refusing to buy anything he didn't absolutely need. His equipment was old even then. The 1956 Farmall 400 he'd bought used for $4,500 in 1968. The 1963 International 806 he'd picked up at an auction for $3,800 in 1971. Both tractors older than most farmers would consider usable. Both paid for in cash. Both maintained meticulously. He'd rebuilt the Farmall's engine twice, replaced the clutch 3 times. Gone through the transmission. He knew every bolt, every bearing, every system on that machine. Same with the International. He'd pulled that tractor apart and put it back together so many times he could do it blindfolded. Some farmers joked that Leonard spent more time fixing his equipment than using it. What they didn't understand was that Leonard was learning. Every hour spent rebuilding a transmission was an hour he didn't have to pay a mechanic. Every bearing he replaced himself was $50 he kept instead of gave away. And that knowledge, that skill, that refusal to pay other people for work he could do himself, that's what gave Leonard the freedom to farm debt-free while everyone else was trapped in payment cycles. In 1981, Leonard was farming his 400 acres, making a decent living. Not spectacular, but steady. He netted about $15,000 a year after all expenses. Enough to live on, enough to save, enough to be content. His neighbors were farming bigger, 800 acres, 1,000 acres, running 3 and 4 tractors. Looked more successful from the outside. But Leonard knew something they didn't seem to understand. They were drowning in debt. Their modern operations required constant payments, equipment payments, land payments, operating loans. They were making more money, yes, but they were also spending more. And the gap between income and expenses was razor thin. Leonard's gap was wide. He made less, but spent almost nothing, which meant every dollar of profit was actual money he could keep or invest or use to buy more land. And after that Farm Bureau meeting, after Dennis Kramer called him too poor to farm right, Leonard decided to stop being content with 400 acres. He decided to show everyone what too poor to farm right could actually build. The opportunity came in October of 1982. A farm 2 miles down the road went up for sale. The owner, Bill Patterson, had died, and his kids didn't want to farm. They lived in California, worked white-collar jobs, wanted nothing to do with Kansas dirt and wheat harvests. The farm was 240 acres, not huge but solid ground. Some of it had been in pasture for years, which meant it hadn't been farmed hard. Good potential. The kids listed it for $80,000, market price for the area. They expected it to take months to sell. Leonard made them an offer 3 days after it listed, $72,000, cash, close in 2 weeks. The kids took it immediately. They didn't care about getting top dollar. They cared about getting rid of the property and getting back to their lives in California. Leonard borrowed $40,000 against his paid-off farm at 6% interest, put $32,000 cash from his savings, closed in 12 days. Suddenly, he owned 640 acres, but he also had a mortgage again for the first time in 7 years, $40,000 at 6% over 15 years, monthly payment $337. Every farmer Leonard knew would have said the same thing. You bought new land, but you're still farming with those old tractors. When are you going to upgrade your equipment? Leonard's answer was simple. When the land is paid off. He wasn't going to make the mistake of owing money on both land and equipment. One or the other, never both. The Farmall and the International could handle 640 acres. It would take longer. Leonard would work more hours, but it was possible. And the key word was possible, not efficient, not modern, not impressive, just possible, which was all Leonard needed. Let me stop here and ask you something. When was the last time you chose possible over impressive? When did you last pick the slower, harder path because you knew it was safer? Drop a comment, because Leonard Shaw spent the next 20 years choosing possible over impressive, and it made all the difference. Farming 640 acres with 2 old tractors meant long days. Leonard would start at sunrise, work until dark, cover maybe 25 acres a day with the plow, 30 with the planter. The modern farmers with their 4-bottom plows and 8-row planters could do the same work in half the time. But Leonard didn't care about time. He cared about payments. His monthly obligations were minimal. $337 for the land mortgage. That was it. No equipment payments, no operating loans, no credit cards. Just that one payment. He made it easily. Even in bad years. 1983 brought drought. Yields were down 40% across the county. Farmers with high overheads struggled. Some couldn't make their payments. Some had to take out operating loans just to plant the next year's crop. Leonard's income dropped from $15,000 to $9,000 that year, but his expenses were so low that he still cleared enough to make his land payment and live on. In 1984, prices crashed. Wheat that had been $4 a bushel the year before dropped to $2.70. Farmers who'd planted assuming good prices found themselves in trouble. Leonard made his payment, kept farming. The farm crisis was hitting hard by 1985. Foreclosures were happening monthly. Good farmers losing everything. Equipment auctions every other weekend. Leonard went to those auctions, not to gawk, to buy. A 1958 John Deere 720 diesel sold for $1,800. Leonard bought it, spent $400 on parts and maintenance, had a third working tractor for $2,200 total. A 5-bottom plow sold for $600. Leonard bought it. Now he could cover more acres per day. An 8-row planter went for $900. Leonard bought that too. While everyone else was losing equipment, Leonard was accumulating it, paying cash, buying at auction prices, building capability without taking on debt. By 1986, Leonard had 3 tractors and a full line of implements. Total invested over 4 years, about $8,000, all paid in cash, all from auction purchases. A comparable modern setup would have cost $80,000 and required financing. And then, in 1987, another farm came available. The Johnson place, 320 acres. The family had been there for 3 generations, but the 3rd generation couldn't make the payments on equipment they'd financed in the early 80s. Bank foreclosed. Everything went to auction. The land sold separately. Starting bid, $60,000. Leonard bid $62,000. Nobody countered. He got it. He went back to his bank, showed them his payment history, showed them he'd never been late on a single payment in 5 years, asked to increase his mortgage to cover the new purchase. The bank approved it. New mortgage, $98,000 total, his existing $40,000 minus what he'd paid down, plus the $62,000 for the new land. 15 years at 7%. Monthly payment, $880. Higher than before, but still manageable. And now Leonard owned 960 acres, all of it paid for except the mortgage, all of it farmable with his collection of auction-bought tractors. Dennis Kramer heard about it. Drove out to Leonard's place one afternoon. "Leonard, I heard you bought the Johnson land." "I did. You're farming nearly 1,000 acres now, with tractors from the 50s and 60s. When are you going to admit you need modern equipment?" Leonard smiled. "When I can't make it work with what I have. So far, I'm making it work fine. You could be so much more efficient. Dennis, efficiency means different things to different people. To you, it means acres covered per hour. To me, it means dollars kept per acre. I'm very efficient at keeping dollars." Dennis shook his head. "You're leaving money on the table." "Maybe, but I'm not sending money to your bank every month either. So I'll take my version of efficiency over yours." Dennis left frustrated. Again. And Leonard kept farming, kept buying land when opportunities arose, kept refusing to finance equipment. By 1990, Leonard Shaw owned 1,200 acres, 4 different parcels, all purchased at below-market prices, usually from estate sales or foreclosures. All financed, yes, but the total mortgage was only $130,000, monthly payment, just over $1,000, and still farming with auction-bought tractors. The oldest one was from 1956. The newest was a 1972 International 1066 he'd bought for $4,500 in 1989. His neighbors were amazed, confused. Some were starting to understand. "Leonard, how are you doing this?" one of them asked at the co-op. "Doing what?" "Buying land. Every few years you buy another farm. Meanwhile, the rest of us can barely hang on to what we've got." Leonard shrugged. "I don't spend money on equipment payments. Every dollar I save goes into land. Land appreciates. Equipment depreciates." Seemed like an easy choice. "But your equipment is ancient. My equipment is paid for. Big difference." The turning point came in 1995. Dennis Kramer's dealership was struggling. The farm crisis had killed off a lot of his customer base. The farmers who survived were gun-shy about taking on new debt. Sales were down, way down. Dennis had to sell the dealership to a larger operation out of Wichita. He kept his job as a manager, but the ownership was gone. At the same time, Leonard Shaw hit a milestone. In October of 1995, he made his final mortgage payment, 14 years after buying the Patterson place, 13 years after the Farm Bureau meeting where Dennis called him too poor to farm right. Leonard owned 1,200 acres, free and clear, worth about $600,000 at 1995 land prices. Zero debt. His equipment, all bought at auctions, was worth maybe $25,000 total if he sold it. But he didn't plan on selling it. It worked. It was paid for. That was all that mattered. A local newspaper did a story about Leonard. Debt-free farmer builds empire with antique equipment. The article mentioned the 1981 Farm Bureau meeting. Mentioned Dennis Kramer's comment about farmers with old equipment being too poor to farm right. Someone mailed a copy of the article to Dennis at the dealership. A week later, Dennis drove out to Leonard's farm. He looked older, tired, worn down by years of watching his business model collapse. He found Leonard working on his 1963 International in the machine shed. "Leonard, got a minute?" Leonard stood up, wiped his hands on a rag. "Sure, Dennis. What's on your mind?" "I read the article, the one in the paper." "Yeah? You were right. Back in '81, at that meeting, you were right and I was wrong." Leonard didn't say anything, just waited. "I spent 20 years telling farmers they needed new equipment. That debt was just a tool. That modern meant better. And I watched most of my customers either go broke or come close to it. Meanwhile, you—" He gestured around at Leonard's farm. "You built this. With junk I told you was worthless." "It wasn't junk, Dennis. It was paid-off equipment. There's a difference." "I know that now. Took me long enough to figure it out." They stood there in silence for a moment. "Why did you come out here?" Leonard finally asked. "To apologize. For calling you too poor to farm right. For being so damn sure I knew better than you did. For pushing debt on farmers who couldn't afford it." Leonard nodded slowly. "Apology accepted." Dennis held out his hand. Leonard shook it. "One more thing," Dennis said. "If you ever need parts for those old tractors of yours, come see me. I'll get you dealer cost. It's the least I can do." After Dennis left, Leonard went back to working on his tractor. But he was smiling, because in the end he'd proven exactly what he set out to prove, that owning things mattered more than using impressive things, that debt-free farming wasn't backwards, it was the smartest path forward, that too poor to farm right was actually rich enough to farm smart. Leonard Shaw is 86 years old now, retired from active farming. He signed the operation over to his son in 2008. The farm is 2,200 acres now. His son bought additional land over the years, following Leonard's philosophy: pay cash when possible, finance only land, never equipment, and never carry more debt than you can service in a bad year. The equipment? Still mostly older tractors. A few from the 80s and 90s now, all bought used, all paid for. The operation works. Not fancy, not modern by some standards, but profitable and sustainable. And sitting in Leonard's machine shed, preserved and maintained, is the 1956 Farmall 400. The tractor that was there the night Dennis Kramer called Leonard too poor to farm right. The tractor that helped prove him wrong. Leonard takes his grandchildren out there sometimes, tells them the story. "This tractor," he says, "cost me $4,500 in 1968. I farmed with it for 40 years. It helped me buy 6 different parcels of land. It was called outdated and worthless and a sign that I didn't know what I was doing. But this tractor never asked me for a monthly payment, never demanded money I didn't have, never threatened to put me out of business if I couldn't pay. The dealer said I was too poor to farm right. But I used this tractor to build something that outlasted his dealership, outlasted most of his customers, and proved that sometimes the poorest way to farm is to send all your money to the bank." His granddaughter asks the obvious question. "Grandpa, did you ever think about buying new equipment? Just once?" Leonard smiles. "Every time I made a land payment instead of an equipment payment, I thought about it. And every time I chose the land. Because at the end of 40 years, I own 2,200 acres, and you can farm that with any tractor that runs. But if I'd spent that money on equipment, I'd have a pile of worn-out modern machinery and 400 acres. Easy choice, really. So let me leave you with this. Right now, someone's trying to tell you that you're doing it wrong, that your equipment is too old, that you're too poor to do it right, that you need to spend money you don't have on things you don't need to look like you're successful. But Leonard Shaw proved something different. He proved that the people who call you poor for not going into debt are often the ones making money off your debt. That equipment salesmen have every incentive to make you feel inadequate with what you have. That real wealth isn't looking rich. It's being free. The John Deere dealer called him too poor to farm right in 1981. By 1995, Leonard owned 1,200 acres debt-free. Today, his family farms 2,200 acres, all following the same philosophy. Own what you use, don't owe what you have, and never confuse impressive with successful. The dealer's customers? Most of them are gone, foreclosed, sold out, moved on. But Leonard Shaw is still there, still debt-free, still farming with old equipment that works, still proving every single day that too poor to farm right was actually too smart to farm wrong. If this story changed how you think about equipment, debt, and what success really means, do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel for more stories about farmers who built empires while everyone told them they were doing it wrong. Second, drop a comment. Have you ever been called too poor to do something right when really you were too smart to do it wrong? Third, share this with someone who's being told they need to upgrade, modernize, or finance something they can't afford. The dealer said old equipment meant you were too poor to farm right. Leonard used that old equipment to buy more land than everyone who mocked him. And that's the difference between looking successful and being successful. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.